the 1940s, the OSS was fighting the scourge of Nazism and fascism. Today we are fighting extremism of another type.
Rarely has an American commando emerged from the shadows as prominently as William McRaven. Navy SEALs, even if they are four-star admirals, tend to avoid the spotlight. But his authorship of missions such as the death of Osama bin Laden thrust him before the nation. Hello, I'm John McCaa, now retired and Chancellor of the University of Texas system. We sat down with him to learn more about this Texas sailor who has returned to the Lone Star State to play a role in educating our children.
I was raised in an Air Force family. My father spent 26 years in the Air Force. He had played professional football with the Cleveland Rams from 1938 to 1940. And then as the story goes, he and four other guys kind of saw the storm clouds of war on the horizon. They left the Cleveland Rams, drove out to Los Angeles, signed up for the Army Air Corps. And my father went down to San Antonio to Brooke Field, trained to be a fighter pilot there, and then went over with the 1st American contingent to the UK. And so he spent his war years flying Spitfires, because at the time the United States didn't have anything that could compare with the Messerschmitt. He loved the Spitfire. And then 26 years later, he ended up at Lackland Air Force Base. We'd moved a couple of times from the time I was born in North Carolina. But my dad was not what I would consider a hardcore military like a lot of folks think of the Great Santini or something. Dad was just a wonderful father. I had wonderful parents growing up. He loved his sports, and consequently I learned to love sports. Dad was very patriotic, but he didn't wear it on his sleeve. It was that kind of quiet patriotism that I think you see from a lot of those that were part of the World War II generation. If there was one thing I learned from my parents growing up, it was really about respect for people and recognizing that everybody, no matter what their background is, has value.
Well, tell me about your mom.
She was raised in Grapeland, Texas, very small town. I had an opportunity about a month or so ago to go back to Grapeland after about 40 years. It's a wonderful small town in East Texas. She met my father, I think, in about 1946. He was stationed down in Victoria, Texas. She was always the classic kind of Southern lady. As we were talking earlier, she always taught me to say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. Again, great respect for people. She really was just truly a wonderful mother and again, a great lady.
You said that your dad loved his sports. So you were also, I understand, a pretty hard charger in the sports. Pretty good in high school, pretty good yourself.
Now, after spending a couple of years on the bench, I started running track, and it turns out I had pretty fair endurance. And then I came here to Texas as a walk-on and ran, I'll qualify that. I was on the track team for 2 years here at Texas before I started just kind of bulking up and getting larger. And I remember the coach coming to me at one point in time and saying, Bill, we don't have any 185-pound milers. Maybe you should, find another sport. My sister was dating an Army Green Beret. And remember, this was the time not long after the movie with John Wayne had come out, The Green Berets. Nobody knew about Navy SEALs, but if you were in the military, you knew about Army Green Berets. And this young Army captain came to visit my sister. She was late as usual, getting ready for the date, and so I had a chance to talk to him, and he said, I understand you're thinking about going into Navy ROTC. I said, yeah, that's kind of the plan. He said, well, then you ought to be a Navy SEAL. I'd never heard of Navy SEALs. But if this Army Green Beret was telling me to be a Navy SEAL, I thought I need to check into this.
So you went into BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition
SEAL training.
SEAL training.
It was 6 months of essentially kind of constant physical training and harassment for 6 months. We started in our class with about 155 guys. We graduated with 33, and that was actually considered a large class back then. But I tell folks when they say, my gosh, how did you make it through that training? I said, I was 21 years old. When you're young and 21, you can do a lot of things. If you were worried about what was coming next, or you're worried about the pain, or you're worried about the harassment, or you had doubts about whether you would make it, I think most of those guys didn't make it. So soon after training, I went into what was referred to as Underwater Demolition Team 11, and the UDTs and the SEAL teams were brother organizations. You bounced back and forth between one or the other. And then about 15 years into my career, I was selected to command a SEAL team, and that's a big milestone for an officer. And at that point in time, I realized that it was now a profession. And it was the profession of arms, and everything you did had to be professional. And you had to make sure that people that worked for you understood the importance of being a professional. And then really after 9/11, it became a calling. It really was something that was bigger and greater than myself, and you saw that with the 9/11 generation and the great soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that came in after 9/11 in particular and fought in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Where were you when you first heard about September 11th? What was going on?
Well, I was recovering from a parachute accident. So I had been in a parachute accident sometime in June, and I got pretty banged up in the parachute accident. So I was actually recuperating in my government housing in Coronado, California, when the planes struck the towers. But I was to the point where I was out of a wheelchair and I could get up on crutches. And really within a couple of days, I was asked to come down to our headquarters in Tampa and start some initial planning. And then fortunately, a retired Army general named Wayne Downing asked me to come to the White House in October. So soon after September 11th, within a month, I was making my way into the White House.
My understanding is something on the order of 69 to 70,000 members of the Special Operations community. Now, all of them at some point in their career are going to come across your book.
Yeah.
That's my understanding. That being the case, what was it that made you believe that you wanted to take this beyond just you learning from others, but you wanted to contribute to all this?
I received orders to the Naval Postgraduate School, and to get your thesis, to get your master's, you had to write a thesis. So I set out to develop principles of special operations. A couple of years after the thesis was published at the Naval Postgraduate School, Random House picked it up. And again, if you want to fall asleep at night, this is the book you need to read.
No. I mean, I'm a civilian. I mean, I can remember 4 S's and also repetition and purpose.
Right.
So it's simplicity, surprise, speed. Give me the 4.
Very good. So it's a simple plan, carefully concealed,
Okay.
repeatedly rehearsed, and exercised with surprise, speed, and purpose.
And purpose.
Not bad, John.
Yeah. Getting close. But what you essentially found were these common things that made all of them successful.
Correct.
That being the case, let's talk about at least a couple of the missions while you were in special operations for the Navy. One that I think a lot of people have forgotten about is the rescue of Captain Phillips.
Right. So, as you point out, the Maersk Alabama had been taken over by pirates. Captain Phillips elected to essentially become the hostage, and so his crew could continue on. The pirates had him in essentially what was a lifeboat, fairly large-sized lifeboat, enclosed lifeboat. And we received the word probably within about 24 hours that we'd had an American captain taken hostage. I had SEALs that were positioned, somewhere nearby. So the first thing we had to do was to get them close to the lifeboat, rendezvous with a Navy ship that was out there. They parachuted into the ocean. The Navy ship picked them up, and then they began to develop the intelligence that was then subsequently used by the main body of SEALs that came in soon thereafter. And those SEALs are the ones that got on board the USS Bainbridge and really began to facilitate the pirates getting closer and closer. And then, of course, as you know, they finally took a simultaneous sniper shot to take out 3 of the pirates and rescue Captain Phillips.
The other mission that I think nearly everybody is familiar with is Operation Neptune Spear.
When I was first told that they thought they had bin Laden in Pakistan, I was a little skeptical and probably a little dismissive until I had an opportunity to see the initial intelligence. But it was not conclusive, which was the issue all along. So I was briefed, and I had my initial indications probably in November of 2010, but it was just a quick, hey, we think we have a lead on bin Laden. It wasn't until January of 2011 I was called back and had an opportunity to kind of see what the initial intelligence was. And then really over the course of the next several months, we had a number of meetings with the president, and we began to, I say we, it was me and one other SEAL officer, because frankly we couldn't bring in the main body of SEALs because the president was concerned, rightfully so, about any leaks out of the White House on the plan that we were building. So we built a plan and had an opportunity over the course of many meetings with the president to brief that plan, to look at the intelligence, and then finally at one point in time the president said, well, how can we do this? And I said, well, Mr. President, I don't know until I bring the SEALs in and we can rehearse it to see whether or not the plan we've built is really executable. And he said, okay, go ahead and bring them on in. And he said, how long do you need? I said, I think we need about 3 weeks. He gave me the 3 weeks. We brought the SEALs in, off leave actually. They were on leave after having come back from a deployment in Afghanistan. And they were able to train up for the mission. And then 3 weeks later, I was able to tell the president that this was a mission we could do. And the SEALs and also our great Army helicopter pilots went out and executed it. Maybe not flawlessly, but obviously we lost a helicopter in the mission, but everybody got back safe and sound, and we got the objective.
Let's talk, if we can, about your work here at the university, because a lot of people, it may seem to some folks that it's a stretch between what you're doing in the Navy and what you're doing at the University of Texas, but based upon the speeches that I've heard you give, graduation speeches, that sort of thing, you see some similarities.
I think there are a lot of similarities, actually. And I tell folks the transition from being a 4-star running U.S. Special Operations Command to coming here to run the University of Texas system, for me was fairly seamless, because I've run large organizations before. And large organizations are always about the people that work for you. My responsibility as a servant leader is to make sure that the people that work for me have the resources they need, they have the latitude they need to make the decisions. You put them in a position to make good decisions, you help them where you can, and if you do that, things are going to work out just fine. And in my job as the head of U.S. Special Operations, I had 12 what we referred to as subordinate commanders. So while I was a 4-star, I had a couple of 3-star commanders, I had some 2-star commanders, I had some 1-star commanders. Well, here it's similar in terms of you have our flagship at UT Austin, you have MD Anderson and Southwestern, but you also have Tyler and Permian Basin and San Antonio and El Paso, and you have health science centers. And so I have 14 institutions now, but the relationship is very similar. I have great respect for the presidents. We've got some magnificent presidents doing the work around the university. You have to put them in a position to be successful, and that's what I see my role is as the Chancellor, is, again, giving them the resources, giving them the guidance, giving them the top cover when they need it.
You came up with a series of challenges, goals, I believe, called Quantum Leaps, right. 9 of them. And it was really a vision for the direction in which the university system should be going. How's that going?
It's going very well. What we did, and again, part of this comes back to my time in the military, I wanted to come in and find out, let's do a strategic assessment. Let's make sure that the command, or in this case the University of Texas system, are we on the right path? Are we serving the people of Texas the way we ought to be serving them? There are a lot of the kids that are coming to our institutions are not college ready, and therefore you have to spend a lot of time making sure that they go through the undergraduate, that they have the right cohorts, that we're providing them support and mentoring, and then some of them struggle mightily because they came in thinking they were college ready, but they weren't. So this means we have to work with the community colleges, we have to work with the high schools, and find out what can we do to help the students coming up through Texas to be college ready at all of our institutions. And I won't go through all of them, but we looked at everything from leadership to national security, to healthcare.
Also, being the chancellor means that you are now having to confront social issues. What were your thoughts about when you first heard about this idea about campus carry and that sort of thing?
Even before I took the job, a reporter asked me, what do you think about this idea of campus carry and having guns on campus? And I said, candidly, I'm not for it. I've got probably more guns than any one man ought to have. I love my Second Amendment. I love having guns, but I just didn't see a place for them on the campus. And of course, we worked with the legislature as we went through the session to encourage them to not allow guns on campus. But at the end of the day, the Texas legislature made the decision to do that. The governor signed the bill. And as I have told all of our universities, and this does get back to my military training, once the governor signs the bill, once a decision is made and we have made our argument, then now we kind of have to salute smartly and move out. And we have to make sure that we are complying with the law, because it is the law now. There are still concerns out there. We are not dismissive at all of those concerns. I know the campus police have put protocols in place to be able to deal with this. And I'm hoping that as time goes on, the faculty and the concerned students and the concerned parents will recognize that we have put the right protocols in place and that it turns out not to be the issue that a lot of people were concerned that it might be.
Other thing that a lot of campuses are having to deal with now is this talk about safe zones and whether or not students have the right to object to a speaker appearing on campus, which some people have a difficulty with regard to a university where there should be open discussion of some ideas.
Well, I'm a big believer in open discussion of all ideas. And I think this is why you have a university. A university ought to have an opportunity to have diverging viewpoints, and people ought to feel comfortable coming in and talking about those diverging viewpoints. Now, that's not to say you can't have debate about them. You ought to have debate. I'm okay with even heated debate. But I think when it becomes uncivil and when people begin to disrupt a speaker's opportunity to make their case, I think that's inappropriate.
We've seen athletes around the country who have decided that they do not want to stand for the national anthem.
Right.
You sent a letter, I understand, to the athletes who represent the University of Texas. Whether they like it or not, they do represent the university, expressing your thoughts on the idea.
Well, let me take it back, because that letter and that letter was actually to the presidents and the athletic directors. It was not directly to the athletes. Having said that, I'd sent out a letter last January. And I had been to an event and saw the athletes on the floor, and it's not that they were disrespectful. They were just not, I thought at the time, appropriately respectful of the flag and the national anthem. So this was, again, January of this year, and I sent out my first letter, and I just said, look, this is an opportunity to show some respect for the flag, recognizing that we're not a perfect country. We've got a lot of problems. We've got a lot of hurdles to overcome, but this is the American flag. This is the one thing we can all kind of rally around because it's not a flag for Irish American or Italian Americans or African Americans or German Americans. It's a flag for all Americans. And that was my message in January of this year. I was prepared to send that message out again in the fall just because we had a new crew of athletes coming in. I just wanted to kind of reiterate it. It was about the time that the protests started in the National Football League. But frankly, I had already crafted the letter prepared to go out just to say, look, this is an opportunity for us to come together, not to separate ourselves. And I took the time when I wrote the letter, I added a little bit to it to say, let me show you where the flag has been. I mean, the flag has been with the Buffalo Soldiers and the Tuskegee Airmen, and it has marched with Cesar Chavez and with the suffragettes and with Martin Luther King, because we realized the flag was something we could all rally around. And so I am all about protest. I commend all those kids on campus. I think if they are passionate about an issue, they should protest, do so respectfully, but by all means make their concerns heard. And I think one of the reasons I spent 37 years in the military was protecting Americans' right to protest. My only issue, and it wasn't a directive, I didn't tell the athletes they had to do this, I just wanted to give them my perspective that the flag was an opportunity for us to come together rather than to separate us.
Most people who are not familiar with the military have no real concept of what's required of a military spouse. I understand that you moved during your career something like 18 times. Tell me about how your wife and your family have, the role that they've played in your life and your career.
Well, thanks for asking the question. Yeah, my wife and I met here at the University of Texas. We were married. She was a sophomore at the time. I was heading off to SEAL training. She was up for the adventure. We traveled all around the world. And you know, you have to have a spouse, whether it's your wife or your husband or your partner. You have to have somebody that recognizes that this is going to be tough. But at the same time, there are so many advantages. There are so many things you're going to learn. We spent 2 years in the Philippines. We spent 2 years in Germany. Of course, I traveled all around the world, and there were times as I became more senior, my wife had a chance to travel with me throughout Europe, throughout Asia. And again, what you begin to see is, one, we are very, very fortunate to live here in the United States. But two, people all around the world, you know, most people all want the same thing. They want to raise their kids in peace. They want a good life for themselves. And you begin to realize that we all are a lot alike. And your wife, I like to think that Georgianne, as we went through this, she loved the adventure. But having said that, I was deployed a lot. I was gone a lot. So she had to raise the 3 kids. And my first son was born in San Diego, and I left on a 6-month deployment immediately a week later. My second son was born in the Philippines in a Quonset hut. You know what a Quonset hut is, but a small tin hut, no bigger than this room. And my daughter was born while I was out deployed to Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I wasn't there when she was born. So all 3 of my kids were born under different circumstances. They've all grown up to be great adults. I'm very proud of them, but that was because my wife understood that this was a partnership between she and I, that we were in this adventure together. And she has always been incredibly supportive. And I know how difficult that is.
Chancellor William McRaven and family. We say goodbye with advice he gave Austin graduates while still in the Navy. Advice still valuable today.
During the land warfare phase of training, the students are flown out to San Clemente Island, which lies off the coast of San Diego. The waters off San Clemente are a breeding ground for the great white sharks. To pass SEAL training, there are a series of long swims that must be completed. One is the night swim. Before the swim, the instructors joyfully brief the students on all the species of sharks that inhabit the waters off San Clemente. They assure you, however, that no student has ever been eaten by a shark, at least not that they can remember. But you are also taught that if a shark begins to circle your position, stand your ground. Do not swim away. Do not act afraid. And if the shark, hungry for a midnight snack, darts towards you, then summons up all your strength and punch him in the snout, and he will turn and swim away. There are a lot of sharks in the world. If you hope to complete the swim, you will have to deal with them. So if you want to change the world, don't back down from the sharks.